There is a silence that exists only in the seconds before your world ends. It's not a peaceful silence. It's heavy, like a held breath. It's the moment the roller coaster crests the peak, and you're suspended, weightless, before the terrifying, exhilarating plunge. For me, that silence was the most beautiful sound in the world. It was the moment I stood at the end of a flower-strewn aisle, my father's arm linked with mine, looking at the man I believed was my destiny. His name was Mark. And in that silence, he was everything. He stood there, under that arch of white roses, his smile the sun breaking through clouds. He looked at me, and I felt seen. Truly, deeply seen. People always talk about love at first sight, but for Mark and me, it was recognition. It was as if my soul had been searching for his its entire life, and when we finally met at that charity gala 2 years ago, it simply clicked into place. A missing piece, found. I remember our first date. He was so nervous, he spilled his wine. A rich, crimson stain spreading on the white tablecloth. He was so embarrassed, but I just laughed. It was human. Real. He wasn't the polished, untouchable CEO he presented to the world. He was just a man, trying to impress a woman. And he did. Oh, he did. The courtship was a fairy tale. Not the kind with dragons and castles, but the modern kind. The kind with late-night texts that made you smile into your pillow. With surprise bouquets of peonies, my favorite, delivered to my office just because it was a Tuesday. With whispered conversations in the dark, where we shared our deepest fears and our wildest dreams. He told me about the pressure he was under, running his late father's company, the weight of that legacy. I told him about my own dreams, of starting my own interior design firm, of building a life that was authentically ours. He was my rock. When my mother passed away from her long illness last year, he was the one who held me while I cried. He was the one who handled the funeral arrangements when I was too lost in my grief to function. He spoke at her service, his voice thick with emotion, saying how she had welcomed him as a son. I looked at him through my tears and thought, this is what love is. This is the man I will build a family with. The proposal was perfect. It was on a secluded beach at sunset, just us. No grand spectacle, just him on one knee, holding his grandmother's ring, his voice trembling as he asked me to share my life with him. I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. The yes was a sob, a laugh, a release of all the joy I had ever known. The months of planning were a blur of cake tastings and dress fittings, of seating charts and playlist arguments. Through it all, Mark was distant, sometimes. Preoccupied. I'd catch him staring into space, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. When I'd ask him what was wrong, he'd just smile that brilliant, practiced smile and say, just work, my love. You know how it is. So much to secure for our future. And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was building an empire for us. The least I could do was be understanding. The morning of the wedding, I was a bundle of nerves. My bridesmaids, my sister Sarah chief among them, were fussing over me, straightening my veil, telling me how radiant I looked. And I felt it. I felt like I was floating. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror, the delicate lace, the intricate beading, the train that pooled around my feet like a cloud. This was it. The day I became Mrs. Mark Thorne. The day my real life began. As the organist began the first notes of the processional, my father took my arm. His eyes were glistening. "He's a lucky man, my Chloe," he whispered. "Your mother would be so proud." I took a deep breath. The church doors swung open. 200 faces turned to look at me. But I saw only one. Mark. Standing at the altar. Waiting for me. The walk down the aisle felt like a dream. A slow motion, beautiful, perfect dream. The music swelled. The smiles of our friends and family were a warm, glowing blur. My eyes were locked on his. He looked handsome. Devastatingly so in his tailored tuxedo. But his smile, it seemed tight. Strained. Nerves, I thought. He's just as nervous as I am. I reached the end of the aisle. My father kissed my cheek, placed my hand in Mark's, and took his seat. Mark's hand was cold. Ice cold. I gave his fingers a gentle, reassuring squeeze. His eyes met mine, and for a fleeting second, I saw something in them I'd never seen before. Not love. Not warmth. It was a storm. A dark, churning storm. The priest began. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. But I was no longer listening. I was lost in Mark's eyes, trying to find my way back to the man I loved. The man who had held me while I cried. The man who had promised me a future. The priest got to the part we had all been waiting for. He looked at Mark. Do you, Mark Thorne, take Chloe Elizabeth Reed to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? The silence returned. That heavy, prelude to the plunge silence. Mark didn't speak. He just stared at me, his jaw clenched. The priest cleared his throat gently. Mark. And then, Mark spoke. His voice was low, a venomous whisper that only I and the priest could hear. I have a question. My heart stuttered. A question. Now. He looked directly at me, his eyes hard. The prenup. My lawyers sent the final version to your email this morning. Did you sign it? The air left my lungs. The entire church seemed to hold its breath. This. He was asking about the prenuptial agreement now? At the altar. We'd discussed it. I had no problem with it. His family wealth was complicated. I had told him I would sign anything. My voice was a shaky whisper. Mark, not now. Of course I'll sign it. Later. His grip on my hand tightened, becoming painful. No. Not later. Now. I need to know you're not like all the others. That you're not just after my money. The words were a physical blow. After his money, I had my own career, my own life. I had loved him when he was just a man who spilled wine on a tablecloth. Tears sprang to my eyes. How can you ask me that? Here. Now. His face contorted. The handsome mask slipped completely, revealing something ugly and cruel beneath. Sign it on my phone. Right now. Or this wedding is over. I was trembling. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over me. I could feel the confused stares of our guests. I heard a murmur ripple through the church. Mark, please, I begged, my voice breaking. Don't do this. And that's when it happened. The world stopped. His hand, the one that was supposed to wear my wedding ring, moved so fast I didn't even see it coming. There was a sharp, cracking sound that echoed in the stunned silence of the cathedral. A searing pain exploded across my cheek. He had slapped me. He had slapped me at the altar. In front of my father. My sister. Our friends. Our God. Time froze. The sting on my face was nothing compared to the shattering of my soul. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my cheek, my vision blurring with tears of shock and pain. The gasps from the congregation were a collective wave of horror. I heard my sister scream. I saw my father lurch to his feet, his face a mask of fury. And Mark. He just stood there, his chest heaving, looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. The man I loved was gone. In his place was a stranger. A monster. And in that moment, as my perfect world lay in ruins at my feet, as the pain and humiliation threatened to consume me whole, a strange, cold calm settled over me. Because I remembered something. A secret. His secret. And I knew, with a clarity that was more terrifying than his slap, that this was not the end of my story. This was just the beginning. Narrator, they say your life flashes before your eyes before you die. In that moment, after the slap, it wasn't my life that flashed before me. It was his. It was every little inconsistency, every late night at the office that felt a little too late, every phone call taken in another room, every flicker of unease I had dismissed as stress or my own imagination. The foundation of our relationship, which I had believed was solid granite, was suddenly revealed to be riddled with cracks. And I had chosen to see only the beautiful facade. The slap reverberated through the church, a sound more deafening than any bell. For a second, there was absolute, stunned silence. Then, chaos erupted. My father was the first to move. He was at my side in an instant, his arm around my shoulders, pulling me away from Mark. His voice was a low, dangerous growl I'd never heard before. You will never touch my daughter again. My sister, Sarah, was right behind him, her face pale with fury. She positioned herself between me and Mark, a lioness protecting her cub. How dare you, she spat at him. From the groom's side, Mark's mother, Eleanor Thorne, stood up, her hand clasped over her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like shame? Or was it fear? But Mark seemed to feed on the chaos. He stood his ground, his chest puffed out, as if he had done something righteous. As if he had exposed me as the villain. She needs to sign the prenup, he announced to the entire church, his voice booming in the sacred space. I will not be taken advantage of. That's when the cold calm inside me solidified into ice. The tears on my cheeks felt frozen. The sting on my face was a brand, a reminder of his betrayal. But it was his words that unlocked the memory. Taken advantage of. He had used that phrase before. It was about 3 months ago. We were at his penthouse, curled up on the sofa. He'd had a few glasses of whiskey, which was unusual for him. He was always so controlled. But that night, he was morose, his head in my lap. You're different, Chloe, he'd slurred softly. You're not like her. You don't just want what I can give you. I'd run my fingers through his hair. Like who, Mark? He'd sighed, a heavy, weary sound. There was someone before you. It didn't end well. She tried to take advantage of me, of the company. It was a mess. At the time, my heart had ached for him. I'd pictured a greedy, gold-digging ex-girlfriend who had broken his trust. I'd held him tighter, whispering, I'm not her, Mark. I love you. Just you. He'd looked up at me, his eyes glassy. I know, my love. I know. That's why you're my future. The memory was so clear now, so sharp. The way he'd said take advantage. It wasn't the tone of a man who'd been wronged in love. It was the tone of a man who was afraid of being found out. And then, another memory, clicking into place like a piece of a sinister puzzle. It was just last week. I'd been working late at his place, using his laptop to finalize some design mock-ups for our new home, the home we were supposed to move into after the honeymoon. He'd gotten a video call. His business partner, David. I'd clicked to answer, thinking it was for me, but the screen had flashed to a finance program I didn't recognize before the call connected. A list of transactions. And one name, highlighted in red, had been repeated over and over, A. Miller. With large, regular payments. When Mark had taken the call, he'd been agitated. He'd closed the laptop lid sharply and taken the call on his phone in the other room. Later, I'd asked him if everything was okay with David. He'd forced a smile. Just a disgruntled former employee we had to let go. Nasty business. Nothing for you to worry about. A disgruntled former employee. The explanation had seemed flimsy even then, but I'd been so wrapped up in wedding plans, I'd let it go. Now, standing at the altar, the phantom taste of wedding cake turned to ash in my mouth, those two memories collided. The someone from his past. The disgruntled employee, A. Miller. The frantic, almost paranoid insistence on the prenup. It wasn't about protecting his assets from me. It was about protecting a secret. The priest was trying to restore order, his voice trembling. Please, everyone, let's all just calm down. But the wedding was over. The dream was dead. All that was left was the ugly, naked truth. Mark was still glaring at me, expecting me to be broken. Expecting me to crumble into a sobbing heap and run away in shame. That's what he wanted. For me to be the hysterical bride, so he could be the rational, wronged businessman. He didn't know that the slap hadn't broken me. It had forged me. It had turned my heart from fragile glass into unbreakable steel. I slowly lowered my hand from my cheek. The red mark must have been vivid against my pale skin. I could feel it burning. I stood up straight, squaring my shoulders. I let go of my father's arm and took a small step forward. The movement was so deliberate, so out of place in the chaos, that the room began to quiet down again. All eyes were on me. What would the humiliated bride do? Would she scream? Would she cry? I looked directly at Mark. My voice, when I spoke, did not tremble. It was clear, cold, and cut through the tension like a shard of ice. "You're right, Mark," I said. "This wedding is over." A satisfied, cruel smirk touched his lips. He thought he had won. But I wasn't finished. "But it's not because of a prenuptial agreement," I continued. "It's because I have a question of my own." His smirk faltered. Confusion flickered in his eyes. "Who is Alicia Miller?" The name hung in the air. To most people in the church, it meant nothing. Just a name. But to Mark, it was a detonation. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a ghost. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. He took an involuntary step back, as if I had physically pushed him. From the front row, his mother, Eleanor, let out a small, choked cry. She slumped back into her seat, her hand pressed to her heart. I pressed my advantage, my voice growing stronger, laced with the cold fury I had been holding back. "Alicia Miller. The woman you've been paying $50,000 a month to for the past 3 years. Is she the disgruntled former employee, Mark? Or is she the someone from your past who tried to take advantage?" The church was utterly, completely silent. You could have heard a rose petal drop. Mark was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The confident, powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a trapped, terrified animal. "Because I did some digging, Mark," I lied. I hadn't done any digging. Not yet. But the pieces were all there, and his reaction was confirming everything. It's amazing what you can find when you stop seeing the man you love and start seeing the man who is hiding something. Those payments aren't a salary. They're hush money, aren't they? I took another step towards him. He flinched. "So, I'll ask you again, in front of all your friends, your business partners, your mother. Who is Alicia Miller?" He found his voice, but it was a strangled, desperate thing. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're insane." "Am I?" I said softly, my gaze sweeping over the horrified, captivated audience. "Then why do you look like you've just seen a ghost? Why has your mother been trying to get your attention for the last 5 minutes, looking like she's about to be sick?" I turned to face the congregation, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a powerful, righteous anger. I was still holding my bouquet. The beautiful, expensive flowers I had chosen with so much hope. I let them drop to the floor. They landed with a soft, final thud. "This man," I said, my voice ringing through the church, slapped me because he thought he could control me. He thought he could humiliate me into submission. But he forgot one thing. I turned back to him, meeting his terrified gaze. "You should never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose." And in that moment, I knew. The altar was no longer a place for vows. It was a stage. And the show was just beginning. Narrator, have you ever seen a spider's web glistening in the morning dew? It looks so delicate, so beautiful, a masterpiece of intricate design. But touch it, just brush against it with the tip of your finger, and you realize its true nature. It's a trap. Sticky. Strong. Designed to ensnare. Mark's life was a web like that. A beautiful, glittering trap. And I had just plucked the one central thread that held it all together. Now, the whole structure was beginning to quiver, on the verge of collapse. The silence in the church was profound. It was the silence of 200 people processing a seismic shift. The narrative had flipped. I was no longer the gold-digging bride being put in her place. I was the wronged woman exposing a predator in his own den. Mark was still backing away, shaking his head, his hands held up as if to ward me off. "She's lying," he croaked, but his voice had lost all its authority. It was the plea of a guilty man. "She's making this up to get back at me," but no one was buying it. The sheer, visceral terror on his face was more convincing than any words I could have spoken. That's when a man stood up from the groom's side. David. His business partner and best man. His face was a grim mask of dawning horror and betrayal. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at Mark. "Alicia Miller?" David's voice was low, but it carried in the quiet. "Mark, you told me she emigrated. You told me we settled with a severance package and an NDA. You told me the company accounts were tight because of the market. Those monthly consultancy fees, that was for her? Boom. Another thread in the web snapped. Mark whirled around to face David. David, not here. This is not the place. Then where is the place, Mark? David shot back, his voice rising. When were you going to tell me that the woman the woman who, he couldn't finish the sentence. He just looked at Mark with utter disgust. My God. All this time. The congregation was buzzing now, a hive of shocked whispers. Cameras' phones, which had been discreetly put away for the ceremony, were now openly held up. They were recording everything. Mark's downfall was being live-streamed to the world. I stood my ground, watching the dominoes fall. The cold calm inside me was now a strategic focus. I had thrown a stone into a dark pond, and I was watching the ripples spread, revealing the monsters lurking in the depths. My father's hand was on my shoulder again, but this time it was a gesture of solidarity, of fierce pride. My sister was smiling through her tears, a triumphant, vengeful smile. She squeezed my hand. Get him, Chloe, she whispered. I turned my attention to the one person who seemed to know everything, Eleanor Thorne. Mark's mother was weeping silently into a lace handkerchief, her shoulders shaking. She wasn't surprised by the name. She was devastated by its exposure. I walked towards her, my wedding gown swishing on the stone floor. The crowd parted for me. I stopped in front of her. Eleanor, I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. You know, don't you? You've always known. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a profound, ancient sorrow. Oh, Chloe, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I tried to talk to him. To make him do the right thing. What is the right thing, Eleanor? I asked. Who is Alicia Miller? She glanced over at her son, who was now in a frantic, hushed argument with David. She saw the cameras. She saw the faces of her friends, filled with judgment. The world of old money and reputation she had spent a lifetime building was crumbling around her. The pressure was too much. Her composure broke. She worked at the company, Eleanor said, her voice trembling but clear. She was young, bright. Mark, he pursued her. She got pregnant. A collective gasp swept through the church. Pregnant. Eleanor continued, the words pouring out of her now, a confession long overdue. He didn't want the scandal. He was about to close the biggest deal of his career. A family man image was crucial, he said. He forced her to sign a non-disclosure agreement. He promised to support the child, but only if she disappeared. The payments, they were for the child. My grandson. The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place. The disgruntled employee. The someone who tried to take advantage. It was a young mother and his own son. He had hidden them away, paid for their silence, and built his glittering empire on a foundation of lies and abandonment. The revelation was a nuclear bomb. The whispers turned into outraged exclamations. I saw business associates shaking their heads in disgust. I saw women clutching their pearls, looking at Mark with pure loathing. Mark heard his mother's confession. He stopped his argument with David and stared at her, his face a grotesque painting of betrayal. Mother, shut up. But it was too late. The truth was out. I turned to face him one last time. The man who had promised me a future. The man who had held me when I cried for my own mother. The man who had just slapped the taste of love from my mouth. You have a son, Mark, I said, my voice resonating with a power I didn't know I possessed. You were so worried about me signing a prenup to protect your legacy, that you were willing to destroy me at the altar. But your real legacy, your son, you were paying to keep him a secret. You were ashamed of him. I took a deep breath, looking around at the sea of faces, ensuring every single person heard my final words to him. You didn't just betray me today. You betrayed your own child. You are not a man. You are a coward. And this, I gestured to the beautiful, ruined wedding around us. This is the consequences of your lies, catching up with you. I didn't need to do anything else. The web had fully unwoven. His relationship with his partner was shattered. His reputation was destroyed. His mother had publicly condemned him. The world now knew him for the monster he was. I looked at my father and my sister. Let's go. And with my head held high, the red mark on my cheek a badge of honor, I turned my back on Mark Thorne. I walked back down the aisle, not as a humiliated bride, but as a woman who had taken back her power. The guests stood as I passed, some with tears in their eyes, some with looks of respect, all bearing witness to the end of one story, and the brutal, shocking beginning of another. I walked out of the church and into the blinding sunlight, leaving the chaos, the betrayal, and the broken man behind me. The revenge I had planned in that split second after the slap was complete. It was more devastating than any physical or legal battle. I had destroyed him with the one thing he thought he had controlled completely, the truth. But as the heavy church door swung shut behind me, muffling the sounds of his ruin, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice. And for Alicia Miller, wherever she was, and for a little boy who deserved to know his worth, it was only the first chapter. Narrator, there's a certain stillness that follows a storm. The air is clean, charged, but the landscape is forever changed. Trees are uprooted. Foundations are exposed. That was the stillness I walked into when I left the church. The door closed, and the world outside was exactly the same. The sun was shining, birds were singing, cars were honking in the distance. But I was not the same woman who had walked in, filled with hope, just an hour before. I was a survivor, standing in the aftermath, surrounded by the ashes of my old life. My father and sister were flanking me, a protective, furious phalanx. Sarah immediately whipped out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I'm calling a lawyer. Right now. We're suing him for assault. For emotional distress. For everything. I put a hand on her arm. Wait. She looked at me, incredulous. Wait. Chloe, he hit you. In front of everyone. We have to nail him to the wall. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its wake. He's already nailed to the wall, Sarah. Did you see his face? Did you see David's face? His mother. His reputation is gone. That was the wall. And we just hammered the final nail. My father, ever the pragmatic one, nodded slowly, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. She's right. The court of public opinion just handed down a life sentence. No business partner will trust him. No board will keep him. The video is probably already going viral. A lawsuit, it would just drag us through the mud with him. This was cleaner. Clean. It didn't feel clean. It felt messy and painful and brutal. But it was effective. We drove back to my parents' house in silence. I sat in the back seat, still in my wedding gown, staring out the window. The white lace and satin felt like a costume now, the uniform of a woman who no longer existed. I was a ghost in my own life. When we got home, the first thing I did was go to my old bedroom. I stood in front of the mirror again. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her eyes were hard, her jaw set. And on her left cheek, a faint, red outline of a hand was still visible. A brand. A reminder. But not of my shame. Of my strength. I had stood my ground. I had fought back with the only weapon I had, the truth. I carefully, methodically, took off the dress. I unbuttoned the countless tiny buttons. I stepped out of the cloud of fabric and let it pool on the floor. I didn't look at it again. I changed into a soft, old t-shirt and sweatpants, clothes that felt like me. Not the bride. Not the victim. Just Chloe. Downstairs, the phone was ringing off the hook. News outlets. Friends. Distant relatives. My father became my de facto press secretary, his voice a steady, calm baritone as he repeated, no comment. The family requests privacy at this time. Sarah, meanwhile, was my warrior. She was online, monitoring the fallout. And it was spectacular. It's everywhere, Chloe, she said, her eyes wide as she scrolled through her tablet. #AlterSlap is trending. #Who is Alicia Miller is number 2. People have already found her LinkedIn profile. She's a marketing manager who left Thorne Industries 3 years ago. The comments, they're all on your side. She turned the screen to me. There was a grainy, shaky video of me asking, "Who is Alicia Miller?" and Mark's face collapsing. The view count was in the millions and climbing. The caption read, "Bride exposes groom's secret love child after he slaps her at the altar." It was surreal. My personal hell had become global entertainment. But strangely, I didn't feel violated. I felt vindicated. Then, an email popped up on my phone. It was from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "Thank you." My heart jumped into my throat. I opened it. "Dear Chloe, you don't know me. My name is Alicia Miller. A friend just sent me the video. I'm sitting here, watching it, and I'm crying. But for the first time in years, they are tears of relief. What you did today, it was the bravest thing I have ever seen. For 3 years, I have lived in the shadow of that man, forced into silence, raising our son, Leo, alone. The money came every month, but with it came the constant fear that he would find a way to stop it, to take him away, to destroy us. The NDA was a chain around my neck. You broke those chains today. You set me free. You set my son free. I am so sorry for what he did to you. No one deserves that. But because of your courage, the world knows the truth. Leo will never have to wonder why his father wanted him hidden. He will know it was never about him. It was about the small, rotten heart of the man who helped create him. If you ever want to talk, I am here. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Alicia and Leo. I read the email 3 times. Tears streamed down my face, but they were different from the tears I had shed in the church. These were not tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of purpose. My revenge, born from a white-hot moment of pain, had done more than just destroy a bad man. It had liberated a good woman. It had given a little boy a chance at a life without secrets. I showed the email to Sarah and my father. My sister started crying too. My father cleared his throat, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You did good, kid," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did real good." In that moment, the last remnants of my broken heart began to mend. Not all the way. The crack would always be there, a scar to remind me. But it was no longer a bleeding wound. It was a testament. The news cycles continued to spin. By the evening, the headlines were even more brutal. Thorn Industries CEO suspended after altar scandal. Business partner David Walker severs ties with Mark Thorn. Investors flee as Thorn stock plummets. Mark's empire, built on sand, was washing away with the tide. I sat on the sofa, curled up under a blanket, a cup of tea in my hands. The wedding of the century was over. The revenge of the century was complete. But as I sat there in the quiet, listening to the steady, comforting sound of my father puttering in the kitchen and my sister talking quietly on the phone, I realized something. This wasn't the end. This was the first day of the rest of my life. A life I had fought for. A life I had reclaimed from the jaws of a monster. The path ahead was unknown, uncharted. But for the first time since I saw that storm in Mark's eyes at the altar, I was not afraid. I was free. Section 5, A New Dawn. Word count, 1480. Narrator, time has a way of healing, they say. And it's true, to an extent. The sharp, jagged edges of pain eventually soften. The nightmares become less frequent. The sound of a slapping hand stops echoing in your dreams. But you don't just get over a betrayal like that. You don't erase it. You absorb it. You learn from it. And if you're strong, you let it transform you into someone wiser, someone kinder to themselves, someone with boundaries made of steel. The weeks after the altar slap, as the internet had so cleverly dubbed it, were a whirlwind of quiet recovery and legal formalities. My lawyer, a fierce woman named Gloria who didn't suffer fools, formally dissolved the engagement and sent a cease and desist letter to Mark, prohibiting him from contacting me or my family. We never heard from him directly. Gloria informed me that his lawyers were too busy fighting a dozen other fires to bother with me. Thorn Industries underwent a massive shakeup. David, the business partner, leveraged the scandal and the evidence of the secret payments, which were a breach of their partnership agreement, to force Mark out completely. The board voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. The company was rebranded, an attempt to distance itself from the toxic legacy of its former leader. Mark Thorne became a ghost. His penthouse was sold. He vanished from the social scene. Rumor had it he moved overseas, a pariah in the world he had once ruled. I didn't care to know. To me, he was already dead. The man I loved had died at the altar, the moment he raised his hand to me. My life, however, was just beginning to bloom again. The first thing I did was focus on my dream. With a small part of the inheritance from my mother and a fire in my belly I didn't know I possessed, I started my interior design firm. I called it Phoenix Design. Rising from the ashes. My first client was, surprisingly, David's wife. She hired me to redesign their corporate offices, a very public show of support. After that, the referrals poured in. Women, especially, wanted to hire me. They'd seen my story, they'd seen my strength, and they wanted a piece of that resilience in their homes and workplaces. It was challenging, exhausting, and the most fulfilling work I had ever done. I was building something that was entirely, unquestionably mine. No one could slap it away. No one could betray it. It was a testament to my own two hands and my own vision. And then, there was Alicia. A few months after the wedding, I took her up on her offer. We met for coffee. I was nervous. What would she be like? Would there be resentment? Jealousy? The moment I saw her, all my fears melted away. She was sitting at a table by the window, a beautiful, serene woman with kind eyes. And next to her, in a high chair, was a little boy with a mop of dark hair and the most infectious giggle I had ever heard. Leo. We didn't talk about Mark much. There was no need. The monster was a shadow we had both escaped. We talked about our lives. She was starting a small online business of her own. She showed me pictures of Leo's first steps. We talked about our mothers. We talked about our dreams. A friendship was born that day. A friendship forged in the fires of the same man's betrayal. It was unexpected, beautiful, and stronger than any bond one had ever had with any of my old socialite friends. We were a tribe of two survivors, and little Leo was our joyful, perfect prince. One evening, about a year after the altar, I was closing up my new design studio. The space was small but bright, filled with fabric swatches, paint samples, and blueprints of my current projects. It smelled of fresh coffee and potential. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. You'll never guess who I ran into at the grocery store. I smiled, typing back. Who? The Pope. Almost as shocking. Eleanor Thorne. My smile faded. Eleanor. I hadn't thought about her in months. And I wrote. She asked about you. She looked older. Tired. She said she's moved to a smaller apartment. She said she's sorry for everything. And then she said, tell Chloe she was the daughter I always wished I had. I read the message twice. A complex swirl of emotions rose in my chest, pity, sadness, a distant sense of forgiveness. Eleanor was a victim of her son's lies, too, in her own way. Trapped by a desire to protect a legacy that was rotten at its core. I felt sorry for her. But I felt no desire to see her. Some bridges, once burned, should never be rebuilt. I locked the studio and stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights twinkled around me. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of peace. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was surrounded by the love of my family, the loyalty of a true friend in Alicia, and the satisfaction of a career I had built from the ground up. The past was a closed book. A painful, dramatic, but ultimately finished story. I started walking towards my car, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the pavement. I thought about the lesson in all of this. It wasn't just all men are monsters. It wasn't love is a lie. The lesson was about perception. About the stories we tell ourselves. I had told myself a fairy tale about a Prince Charming, and I had ignored the whispers of the beast lurking beneath. I had confused grand gestures for genuine character. I had mistaken possession for passion. The real moral of the story is this: trust should be earned, not freely given. Love should be a safe harbor, not a stormy sea. And your worth is never, ever determined by how someone else treats you. Your worth is inherent. It is yours. And if someone tries to slap it out of you, you don't just take it. You use your voice. You speak your truth. You expose the darkness to the light. Because the light, my friends, always wins. My revenge wasn't about hurting him back. It was about reclaiming my power. It was about ensuring he could never hurt anyone like that again. It was about turning my deepest humiliation into my greatest strength. And as I drove home, the city lights fading in my rearview mirror, I knew with absolute certainty that I was no longer the woman who was slapped at the altar. I was the woman who stood back up. I was the woman who fought back. I was the woman who survived. And that is a story with no end.